The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Our second segment, we're going to continue our discussion with Trevor, where we've been talking about the differences between security and compliance in the federal space versus the commercial space. And we were just getting in a little bit of detail of the risk management framework. Before we jump back in, we got a couple more announcements. Our next webcast is February 13th with Sri Sundaralingam. I hope I did that better than Paul will. Sri is Vice President for Product and Solutions Marketing at ExtraHop, and the webinar will talk about cloud native network detection and response. You can register for our upcoming webcast by visiting securityweekly.com and select the webcast drop-down on the top of the page, and from there, you click on the registration button. Also, we have a few days left. Attend RSA Conference 2020, February 24th through 28th, and you can join thousands of security professionals, forward-thinking innovators, and solution providers for 5 days of actionable learning, inspiring conversation, and breakthrough ideas. Register before January 24th. That's where the 3 days left comes in. Save $900 off a full conference pass, but in addition, you can save an extra $150 by going to securityweekly.com/RSAC 2020. That's Romeo Sierra Alpha Charlie 2020, and using our code to register. All right, so we left off in the last segment where Trevor was saying that going through an iteration of the risk management framework can take 3 years. And I think all of us hosts were thinking in the commercial world, we'd be dead if we tried to propose that kind of time frame.
Literally physically dead.
So literally.
No.
No, it would not be pretty. We'd be dead and buried worse than Jimmy Hoffa. Okay.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there rolling their eyes at me, but again, that's my experience. I've worked in very large organizations where, and we do have the benefit of the draft generally comes out a year beforehand, so that would be your first year for planning and preparation. It's like when I worked on the when I was on a team that worked on the HSTS compliance, we were 90% compliant before it became finalized.
You know, I used to work for the federal government, and I don't doubt you when I hear you say that it can sometimes take that long. And I guess that's one of the things that I've enjoyed working in the commercial world is things happen a lot more quickly. There isn't a whole lot of paper pushing and bureaucracy and politics involved. I mean, there's still bureaucracy and politics, but it's there's usually a beginning and end. One of my personal big frustrations of working for the federal government was projects would be put into place that just seemed to have no end. More power to you, I guess.
So
I guess some
Trevor,
aspects
has that ever
of
bit you in the butt? You get the everything ready based on the draft, and then the final comes out, and you're like, they changed a lot. We have to redo half of what we did.
Yeah, I mean, how would anything be relevant 2 or 3 years into it? I mean, technology's changing. You've got new things coming in. The direction of whoever your customer almost invariably has changed.
Fortunately, when these drafts come out, they are generally pretty clear on when they're updated and what differences were made in them, what the updates were. So we can typically roll with those punches.
Okay.
I have to say I'm certainly learning a lot more about the commercial space thanks to you all.
Matt, did you have a comment there?
I said, well, even with some of these risk management projects, right? When you get into poems POAMs.
POAMs, yep.
These things could last for a long time too. So, I mean, even when you think about the cycle, right? Even if you're doing prep prior to draft, then you're doing the implementation. If there are findings or exceptions to those could last for a while too, Trevor, right?
They could absolutely, sorry to cut you off, they could absolutely last for a long time. It could be anywhere between, we overlooked this technical development requirement in our application, we're going to get it on the next iteration that may be a realistic short time, or it could be, we have this alternative processing data center, it's going to take us about 10 years to blast a site out of the mountain so we can go and put it in there. So
let me ask another question, because I'm still just kind of, my mind is spinning over the time frame that you suggested. You're not saying that, like, security teams are still doing their job, there's still stuff going on.
Oh, yeah. The organization maturity already exists.
In theory.
In my space.
Okay.
They all exist in the federal space. The question is, are they fully compliant based on the controls they need to have implemented for the different missions or systems?
Well, I guess that's my question is what you're describing, it's not to put things in place, it's more to put the measurement in the scoring and the evaluation of the maturity of the different things in place.
It could be a bit of both, but okay. That's where, Matt, that's where your security controls assessors would come in. It's like, okay, so how effective is this existing security program? Do they have any gaps that they need to fill? The NICE framework that came out had a lot of education in there and kind of like a heat map matrix. I'm like, well, so my red team is really good in this area, but my blue team may not necessarily be as strong as the red team. So what do I need to do to effectively bring up the maturity of the blue team? Or my program management group that manages all these things, their metrics aren't coming out favorable, or they're just not being generated at a level that's acceptable. Like, where is that? Or my secure provisioning, where I particularly specialize. What does the SDLC, software development lifecycle, look like? How effective, mature, are there any risks in that program?
I'm trying to remember, and Matt or Josh or Scott might remember, back in the early 2000s, I think it was, there was some program put in place that different government agencies were evaluated how secure they were, and I don't remember what the metric was, what the measuring stick was, but I remember certain organizations, they'd be scoring 20% out of 100, and everybody was scoring poorly. But then, they'd come in and get reevaluated or re-audited the next year or maybe 2 years later, and they were happy if they went from 20 to 25%. They were like, hey, look, we got things in place. We're showing improvement. Is that ringing a bell to any of you guys? I don't remember.
I remember what you're talking about, but I don't remember the name of the program.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the program either. But to give the government the benefit of the doubt, I think probably there's a lot of commercial companies that don't have any level of maturity that they should have for what business that they're in. And I think all of us that are playing in the commercial world, we see that too often. So at least the government's doing something and hopefully making, some level of success, and they're moving things forward because there's so many things that are already in place already. That's what I'm hearing you say.
That's where I really come to appreciate agency inspector generals, the Office of Inspector Generals, because in some capacity, those assessments are still there. They're the FISMA assessments, and there's the FISMA scorecard.
Okay.
So I look at it a lot like the capability maturity model, where you're scored on 1 to 5, 1 being chaos and 5 being reproducible and pretty boring, because your organization's so effective. So a lot of agencies will score... I figured you enjoy that. They score in the 3 range, where you do have something there. It could be more mature. Some of your processes could be improved, whatever those constraints may be: budget, personnel, culture, bureaucracy.
So what are some of the elements of the risk management framework, if our listeners, maybe some of our hosts, aren't terribly familiar with it? What does it kind of look like? How does it break out?
So I'm glad I prepared for this. At a very high level, you have your prepare phase, and I was fortunate to be brought on to a team at another large agency to kind of do their risk management framework 2.0 implementation. And so we just spent a pretty grueling 90 days going over how we would implement based on the prepare phase. So that's developing the strategy, coming up with the programs, assessing what types of tools would benefit the organization in this fashion, continuous monitoring after control selection. And then once you get down to there, you get more down to the system or mission business level, which is, what am I going to categorize my assets of? What am I going to categorize my systems of? Do I know what my high value assets are? Do I know what my low value assets are? How operational do these systems need to be? Do they need a 90% uptime? Do I have no ifs, ands, or buts? We brought up life and limb earlier. So that happens a lot with the defense side and the warfighters. They need to be online. They need to be operational. And then you move on to your... What was that?
All the time. Like there's no, they cannot be down.
Right.
Life and limb is the most important risk that we have to manage.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, Trevor, are you using a traditional FIPS 199 to FIPS 200 for kind of the initial categorization of the system and the identification of the controls that need to be applied? Is that what you're using primarily? Is that 199-200 framework?
Right, exactly. Those are exactly what we use because we have to use them. And then, we come in with our expertise and just kind of manipulate it in a way that we can implement into the organization or the system level.
And again, for those that may not be familiar, can you just briefly explain what these FIPS things are?
Oh, I forget which one is which, but there's two of them. One of them is the minimum security controls you need, and the other one is the categorization.
Okay.
Yeah, 199 does the categorization, looks at CI&A, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and you kind of rank them on high, medium, and low, I believe.
Yep.
And if I remember the implementation correctly from my days doing this, you kind of bubble to the high water mark. So if you have high confidentiality but low integrity, low availability, do you still bubble to the high water mark? I think you still do. And so that kind of then, all right, and then from that high categorization, you go into FIPS 200, which is based on 853, and that will tell you which controls need to be implemented for that high system. And that's the basic gist of how the two are supposed to work.
Yeah, it'll tell you it'll tell you that you need your minimum security controls for these different high, medium, low categorizations. But then the risk management framework also promotes guidance, so an organization can sort of pick and choose their minimum security controls. They may be able to implement one. They may inherit another from a common controls provider. They may it may be trivial to implement, or they may not have a budget to implement. Which you'd get a POAM.
Well, I'm learning a lot about all these federal regulations today, if nobody else is.
Yeah, that's all I do.
Matt said the dirty word. He said 850-53, which I've looked.
I didn't say the dirty word. I just said the dirty number.
You said the dirty number. Fair enough. But numbers are actually words, if you think about it.
Just a math problem.
But, I've at various times in my career, I've had projects where I've had to look at 853. I've had the occasional federal customer, and my frustration has always been, wow, this is very comprehensive. There's a lot of detail here, but my company, my customer, has no idea what's important and what's not, what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, what they don't need to be doing, how to prioritize, or anything like that. And what I'm hearing is what was missing is this FIPS 200, which helps them to figure out what's important to them. And
it's actually the combination of 199 to 200, Jeff. Right. 199 sets the categorization. 200, which is a re-implementation of 853, just tells you based on your categorization level which controls should apply, and that's how the two kind of play together.
Gotcha.
Right. One of the things I heard, when you hear like those one-liners and you'll never forget them ever. I heard one, I think from you or maybe Paul or somebody on the proper show, Security Weekly, and it was, every business is now an IT business.
Right.
And that was really thought-provoking to me. I was like, okay, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense, even to small mom and pop shops. But how are they going to build a program, or let alone find a person that can build a program for those based on their revenue stream? Do they know what they even need to protect? So there presents a lot of challenges with that as well.
No, I've had that very experience with a lot of my PCI customers. There, I said it. So we've covered all the bases now, but I've had a lot of customers over the years dealing with PCI that were not. They were not properly prepared for becoming an IT shop. They certainly loved, if you think a retail establishment, 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago, you go into a department store or a grocery store and you want to pay with a credit card, you would have to wait several minutes while the clerk went to a telephone. In the old days, they would have to call an 800 number or wait for somebody to get on the other line, an operator, and they would read all the transaction information, the credit card number, the sale amount, and they would wait and they would get an authorization code that they had to write down on the piece of paper that went through the knuckle buster, the chunk machine. And, that could take 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 10 minutes. Nowadays, where you've got the cash register, the moving belt, everything's got the barcode. You can put your card in and be beginning the payment while you still have stuff on the line. But the authorization comes nearly instantaneously. They love that, but they in my experience, very often they didn't take into account the security costs, the security implications of we're using all this great technology to speed things up and have the opportunity to generate so much more revenue, but that comes at a cost, and helping them to understand what the costs are, that they don't go away, that they're a necessary part of the business, is how I spend a lot of time as an assessor in PCI, just trying to educate them on, you're an IT shop, but and with that comes responsibility. You got all this great tech, but you got to do stuff with it now.
So what I hear out of that is my generation spoiled because we're moving fast.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Millennials, no.
You can say okay, boomer now.
But what's
not.
interesting is your point, Jeff, about convenience versus security,
right?
And how that usability versus security is, of course, the age-old question that we've always had. Right. And I've done it myself. Oh my God, my chip card is taking more than 6 seconds. Woe is me. So I really shouldn't say anything about millennials.
Well, yeah, we've taken a step backwards now using more secure chip cards.
So I think the
you mean
security
chip and
versus
signature, which doesn't work for mind. Anyway,
I think the security versus convenience is a whole other conversation itself. But Matt, you brought up I think, or maybe Josh, I forget, it was a long time ago, brought up talking about metrics.
Mm-hmm.
I did. Yeah,
it's really funny. I saw a new type of card effort between Amazon, JPMC, and a couple other companies where they're trying to make your palm or your hand the new way of authenticating a card use.
Well, that's a vein. The veins in your hand are a unique map. Even more so than a fingerprint, because they've actually done the math behind it. Weirdly enough, fingerprints don't have scientific basis for being unique.
I think we're going to have to go watch Idiocracy later on then.
Interesting.
What?
I think we're going to have to watch Idiocracy later on then.
I'm missing the reference.
Future, man.
Oh.
You're too old. It's a young reference.
And you thought that reference was about you, don't you?
So Matt, you had a question about metrics?
Well, we did at the beginning. We were talking about metrics, and I said I think one of the challenges a lot of people have is, how to develop a set of metrics that actually help you measure where you are in your program, and actually report that up to the right. In the commercial world, it's more executives and the board. I'm not quite sure what the equivalent is in the federal space, whether it's it's the agency head or how those are structured. But again, how do you come up with a set of valid metrics to measure your program against after you've done all this prep work, right? You've got the controls in place. But my guess is a good metric is not how many vulnerabilities do I have in my environment. What is the appropriate set of metrics then to measure against that?
Before you answer that, Trevor, can I add something to it?
Sure.
In the commercial world, we use metrics to justify compliance. We use metrics to say, this is why you need to be compliant. because you have, as Matt said, you have 75 critical vulnerabilities, and if you don't fix them, it's a mixture of security and compliance. If you don't fix them, Jeff Mann will come in and be your QSA and tell you that you're never going to take a Visa card again or whatever. And I know you're not a QSA anymore, Jeff. I apologize. I'm not being precise. Forgive me. I know how precise you are.
It's okay.
But the point is that we use metrics as a justification and to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, et cetera, et cetera. Is that in the federal world, you don't really need a justification for compliance. It is done by mandate from on high. So I guess my addition to Matt's question is, what are the metrics used for?
So at the program level, metrics are used to determine how effective this project or program's going. What I like to use metrics for, and this is because I'm a stubborn bonehead, is to justify my argument. So I will develop metrics and have them system generated. If not, I'll have them manually generated to, if somebody's being a blocker, for example, I will generate metrics that hold them accountable and actually make it very clear that they're a blocker. Sometimes I'll go and generate metrics so somebody has the numbers, and if they say no, then they're in the wrong for saying no, because this is something that needs to happen. Justify
you create a
resource.
quantitative argument, not a qualitative argument.
Yeah. And where my stubbornness comes in, one of the coasties that I know he said to me, which is the quote from Spaceballs, which is, when you're right, and you're always right. And I like to use metrics to supplement that.
So then what do you use for metrics, Trevor?
I mean, are you...
Yeah. Oh. But what are, can you give us an example of some of the metrics you use for that? Because I think examples help people really understand what should they be measuring.
The scenario where I had a customer that was asking me to manipulate metrics, those metrics were showing that previous years when this particular individual ran the program, we were generating more audit findings than findings were being resolved. This was a physical configuration audit, so it was actually validation of the data that was being generated. Through actually producing these metrics, and I did it manually. Like, this was my first time learning Visual Basic and working out of an Access database just so I could punch numbers. And I was able to show over the course of time that we were so far in the negative, but by me improving this process, we were able to show that we were actually remediating more findings than we were generating, and that was able to help the organization turn around. And it caught the attention of the chief information officer, who ended up justifying more of a budget for us to be able to do these sorts of things, and then also get into an automated approach. Other times it was, hey, I'm doing a lot and I'm wearing too many hats and I could use more resources to do it. Let me show you everything that I'm doing in all the different groups I have to embed myself in, assisting the program manager to being the security engineer to being a systems administration. Like, I need help. Here's my metric supporting that.
So the short answer to Matt's question as an example of metrics was number of audit findings, which translates to deficiencies in whatever the plan is.
It showed the process was not effective.
Gotcha. Is there another example you can give? I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me ask a question. Is there such a thing as too many findings or too many metrics?
Sure. Yeah. I've seen dashboards that I look at the numbers and I'm like, I have no idea what this means. This doesn't make any sense. Is this just too much data?
Okay. So how would you define scoping down the amount of metrics that one should be looking at?
I personally believe that would be going back to what your requirement is and what your justification is.
That makes sense.
Or the argument.
I mean, it sounds like what you're asking, Scott, is, is there such a thing as metrics for metrics? Is there a metric for the metrics that you're using?
Listen, when you're gathering metrics about metrics to define more metrics, oh man, you're opening a wormhole.
Well,
okay, so Trevor is going to be starting a conference series called Metricception.
And we'll have one of my favorite bands, Metric, actually be playing. But we need to develop metrics to justify getting their budget here and actually like wanting to perform.
Yeah, you need metrics for your business plan to pull off the whole event.
Exactly.
The fact that Matt said that with a straight face kills me. Anyway,
Well, we know who the executive is here.
But in the commercial world, what are some of the metrics? I know the ones that I see. What are some of the metrics you guys see? My esteemed hosts.
We see a lot of analysis paralysis, which is when you have too many metrics.
Right.
When that pane of glass just becomes cluttered with crap. We see a lot of people that try to measure everything under the sun, and even some of the things that they measure, they're measuring so badly. In terms of compliance, it's how many items are added to the auditable repositories every day, week, month, year, and we're like, do you really care as long as the right ones are there?
Right.
And how many onboarding documents are added, and if the onboarding documentation is long enough.
That
and it's like,
that
what's
reminds me of another scenario I was in. I was part of a team at an agency. We were the enterprise configuration management team, and I like to say we were real configuration management. Not is configuration management just a tool? It was like what was developed back in the 60s out of skunkworks. So we would take the developer code base and assess it, or rebuild it in our own environment before we moved on to QA team. So we were one of the stage gates. So out of that, we generated a lot of metrics on baselines, type of baselines, the amount of defects we would find out of there, how many times we had to go back and actually correct documentation or anything. And that was an overload of metrics, but they were necessary, and we were reporting those to all the teams for various years, or a great number of years. And then we had a new director come in, and she asked, are these actually useful to the other teams? We're like, I don't know. She's like, well, let's just stop sending them and see what happens. And over the course of a month, there was only one report out of about 16 or so that was actually being utilized outside of our own team.
Yeah, I had
screen tested it.
Screen test.
Well,
Yeah.
it's one thing to take metrics. It's another thing to actually voice them across business units, and show progress. And a lot of people, at least from what Josh and I have seen, a lot of people really struggle with that, right? How do you get board level, C-level, upper management to really take metrics seriously when they've got so many other things that they're in charge of, right? Has always been a constant struggle.
One of the things I've seen at the management level is metrics justifying the performance level of their actual employees. It didn't take me long to catch on to some of the metrics I was generating was actually being used in performance reviews, determining if that person was going to get a raise, if they were going to get a step upgrade, if their GS.
The problem is anything you metric will improve. This is a warning, not a good thing potentially.
Yeah,
call centers. The classic one is call centers. When they metric how fast people closed calls, they close calls really fast when they just hang up on 30 people in a row.
And they become inflated.
Yep.
No. Wait, metrics get inflated in government work? No.
And there's a way to game the system no matter what the system is? Yes?
That's why we're hackers.
There's never a way to game the system, ever. No, not going to happen.
We just hack our way through.
Nope.
One of my early experiences when I first started working at Tenable, and I was in the marketing department, and at the time we had weekly meetings where it was like Monday morning, and we would review the different campaigns and programs that were going on, whether it was like an email blast or going to a conference and having a booth, whatever it was. And I remember one of the first meetings they were talking about some email campaign. They'd sent out 20 or 30,000 emails, whatever the number was. And, that had translated to, let's say, 8 leads. I'm making up these numbers to some degree, but it was some large number with some very small result. And they were reporting that, and I raised my hand and asked the question, is that good? And nobody could answer the question.
That's fair. It's very fair.
So I think one of the challenges of metrics in terms of coming up with good metrics, measurable metrics, meaningful metrics, is giving context to them. It's one thing to show improvement, but should the number have been 8 and that was outstanding because in the past it's always been 2, or was the number 8 and usually they're used to getting 20 or 30 or 50? Nobody could answer that question. So I think it's if you're going to use metrics beyond determining what the metrics should be, I think it's important to figure out what the metrics mean and what's meaningful in terms of trending, if that's a way that you're applying the metrics.
Absolutely. Generating metrics, it helps to know what they're going to be used for at the strategic level or the business level. I've seen a lot of teams that are generating metrics, and then I'd go to them and be like, what did these mean? Like, I don't know. We just got it from that person over there, who got it from that person over there, who got it from
so
this
here's the loaded
organization.
question. What's the best compliance metrics you've ever seen?
That I haven't generated my own?
You generated, I don't care. What's the best compliance metrics you've ever used, seen, generated, whatever?
The best compliance metrics I've seen was that example of how I was able to take an ineffective auditing program to becoming a very effective auditing program. And to toot my own horn, it was so good, the inspector general, the contract that was hired to come and review the programs, are like, you've just went from one of the worst to audit to one of the best to audit in this part of the government. I was like, well, all right, that just seemed pretty common sense to me, but I'm learning that may not be common sense to everybody else or anybody else. Personally, my favorite types of metrics are the ones that make me look good.
Maybe
So
not so
metrics-
self-serving.
That might be the bottom line right there.
I do have to share, because Matt,
Go ahead. Sorry,
I do
Trevor.
have to share, Matt brought up POAM earlier. Those are plan of actions and milestones, and generally a lot of metrics will go into there that'll justify, they have to put in what the finding is, how to resolve that finding, and the budget that's going to be needed or resources that's going to be needed to resolve that finding. And there has to be a whole project plan behind it, so those are going to have supporting metrics as well. And POAMs can be anything. A couple of years ago, I learned that you can actually POAM a person. If a person is being a massive blocker, you can justify your metrics and go and POAM them. And immediately after, in my own relationship, I received a POAM.
So
That's a performance improvement plan. That's not a POAM.
Oh, it most certainly was a POAM.
So you're saying that metrics, passwords, and politicians all have one thing in common, and they should be changed?
So I work in, I always get it wrong, nonpartisan part of the government, so I don't typically share my opinion.
good answer.
Good answer.
We should probably
Very
leave
good.
it there. So our time's about up. To summarize, I guess you came in talking risk management framework, sort of believing that compliance is very important. Final takeaway. What would you like our audience to cling to?
I was very fortunate to have a mentor earlier on that was able to point me to all these resources. It was able to help me educate myself to become more effective as a professional. So the big audience takeaway is the four-letter word is NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, and they do produce a lot of good work, even if it's the argument of an academic versus practicality approach. The work is still really good, and it applies to all organizations.
All right, great. All right, that's going to do it for us today on Security and Compliance Weekly. Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.